built exactly 100 Fairlanes that were never meant for the street. The Thunderbolt was so extreme, so purpose-built for drag racing, that Ford's own dealers refused to sell them as regular cars. This is the story of Ford's factory drag racer that terrified General Motors and made Chrysler's engineers work nights trying to catch up. In early 1964, drag racing was the hottest form of motorsports in America. Every weekend, tens of thousands of fans packed drag strips to watch factory-backed teams battle for supremacy. Chrysler's 426 Max Wedge was dominating NHRA's factory experimental class. GM had just introduced the Z11 Impala with its mystery 427. Ford was getting embarrassed at every major event, and corporate headquarters demanded a solution. Ford's solution was the Thunderbolt, and it was completely insane. The Thunderbolt started as a 1964 Fairlane two-door sedan, but calling it a Fairlane was like calling a fighter jet a Piper Cub. Ford's engineers at Dearborn Steel Tubing ripped out everything that didn't make the car faster. The front bumper was replaced with fiberglass. The hood was fiberglass with a massive scoop. The front fenders were fiberglass. Even the inner fender wells were cut away to make room for the engine. The doors were aluminum. The seats were lightweight buckets. There was no back seat, just a metal panel. No radio, no heater. The rear window was plexiglass. Ford removed over 400 pounds from a standard Fairlane before even touching the drivetrain. But weight reduction was just the beginning. The real story was what Ford stuffed under that fiberglass hood. Ford took their high-riser 427 cubic inch V8 and bolted a Paxton supercharger to it. This wasn't a mild street supercharger setup. The Paxton was spinning at over 7,000 RPM at full boost, cramming air into those massive cylinder heads through dual 4-barrel carburetors. Ford rated the engine at 425 horsepower, which was an absolute lie. Independent dyno tests showed the Thunderbolt making over 600 horsepower at the rear wheels. The engine modifications went deeper. Ford used a stronger bottom end with 4-bolt main caps. The crankshaft was forged steel. The connecting rods were heavy-duty units designed for sustained high RPM abuse. The camshaft was aggressive enough that the engine barely idled. These were race engines that happened to have VIN numbers. The exhaust dumped straight out through cutouts ahead of the rear wheels. No mufflers, no catalytic converters obviously. Just open headers creating a sound that could be heard from a mile away. When a Thunderbolt fired up in the pits, every conversation within 100 yards stopped. Ford didn't sell Thunderbolts through normal dealer channels. You couldn't walk into a showroom and order one. Instead, Ford handpicked racers who had proven track records and the mechanical ability to maintain these cars. The buyers had to sign agreements stating they understood these were race cars, not street vehicles. The price was listed at around $3,900, but that number was misleading. Ford was losing money on every Thunderbolt they built. The actual cost to produce each car was significantly higher, but Ford needed them in racers' hands to compete against Chrysler and GM. Corporate pride was worth more than profit margins. Each Thunderbolt came with minimal options because there were no options. You got one paint color choice among a limited selection. You got the Supercharged 427. You got a 4-speed manual transmission. You got drag racing slicks mounted on steel wheels. That was it. Ford wasn't building these for customers who wanted choices. They were building them for one purpose: win drag races. The Thunderbolt's first major appearance was at the 1964 NHRA Winter Nationals in Pomona, California. Ford brought a team of these cars driven by Gas Ronda, Butch Leal, and other top Ford racers. The Mopar teams showed up confident their Max Wedge cars would dominate like they had all through 1963. That confidence lasted until the first qualifying session. Gas Ronda's Thunderbolt ran an 11.76 at 122 miles per hour. In 1964, those numbers were absolutely shocking. The Max Wedge cars were running low 12 seconds. Ford had just shown up with cars running a full half-second quicker. The Chrysler and GM teams couldn't believe what they were seeing. By the end of Winter Nationals, Thunderbolts had taken the top 3 positions in factory experimental. Ford had gone from drag racing embarrassment to total dominance in one event. The message was clear. Ford was back, and they'd brought something nobody could touch. The Thunderbolt's success created immediate problems for Ford's competitors. Chrysler went back to the drawing board on their Hemi program. GM rushed development on their own lightweight drag cars. The NHRA started getting pressure from other manufacturers to ban the Thunderbolt for being too extreme. But Ford had followed the rules. The cars were built on production Fairlane bodies. The engine, while heavily modified, was based on a production 427. The Supercharger was a bolt-on unit that any racer could theoretically install. Ford had threaded the needle perfectly, building a purpose-built drag racer that technically met all homologation requirements. What made the Thunderbolt so devastating wasn't just the power, it was the complete package. The weight reduction, the power delivery, the suspension tuning, the tire selection. Ford's engineers had optimized every single component for one thing: getting down a quarter mile as fast as physically possible. Through the 1964 season, Thunderbolts dominated NHRA's factory experimental class. Drivers like Ronnie Sox, Gas Ronda, and Len Richter campaigned these cars at tracks across America. Every major event saw Thunderbolts in the finals. The car's performance was so consistent that betting on a Thunderbolt to win became the safe choice. The cars were violent to drive. The supercharged 427 had almost no low-end torque, then would explode into full power around 3,500 RPM. Drivers had to master the launch, keeping the engine on the edge of that power band while managing wheel spin on the primitive drag slicks of the era. Get it wrong, and the car would either bog down or spin the tires through first and second gear. But get it right, and the Thunderbolt was unbeatable. The superchargers whine, the open headers scream, the acceleration that would pin you back in the lightweight bucket seat. These were pure racing machines with license plates, and they changed drag racing forever. Ford's decision to build only 100 Thunderbolts was deliberate. They needed enough cars to satisfy NHRA's minimum production requirements and get enough into racers' hands to dominate the season. Building more would have increased losses on a program that was already hemorrhaging money. Ford's accountants were thrilled when production ended. But those 100 cars accomplished exactly what Ford needed. They re-established Ford's credibility in drag racing. They proved Ford could engineer vehicles that competed with anything from Chrysler or GM. They generated massive publicity as crowds packed drag strips to watch these supercharged monsters run. The Thunderbolt also created a blueprint that Ford would follow for decades: build extreme performance vehicles in limited numbers, sell them to serious enthusiasts, and let their racing success drive sales of regular production cars. The Thunderbolt was the original Ford factory hot rod. By 1965, NHRA had changed the rules in ways that made the Thunderbolt less competitive. The sanctioning body was trying to bring some parity back to drag racing after Ford's 1964 dominance. New classes and restrictions meant the Thunderbolt's advantages were reduced. Ford moved on to other programs, and the Thunderbolts quietly disappeared from major national events. But their legend only grew. Stories spread about how violent these cars were to drive, how nothing could touch them in their prime, how Ford had built something so extreme that even their own dealers were scared of them. The truth was almost as wild as the legends. Today, surviving Thunderbolts are among the most valuable Ford muscle cars ever built. Documented examples regularly bring over $200,000 at auction, with the best cars pushing toward $300,000. Only about 50 of the original 100 cars are known to still exist. Many were crashed, blown up, or modified beyond recognition during their racing careers. The survivors represent something unique in automotive history. These weren't street cars that someone modified for racing. These were purpose-built race cars that Ford sold with VIN numbers and titles. They were factory hot rods before that term really existed. Collectors chase Thunderbolts not just for their rarity, but for what they represent. This was Ford at its most aggressive, building cars specifically to embarrass the competition on drag strips across America. No compromises, no comfort features, just pure, supercharged, tire-smoking performance wrapped in a Fairlane body. The Thunderbolt proved something important about Ford's engineering capabilities. When the company decided to dominate a form of racing, they could do it completely. The car's success came from attention to every detail. The weight reduction, the power delivery, the suspension setup, the tire selection, nothing was left to chance. Modern Ford performance cars owe their existence to the Thunderbolt's philosophy. Build it extreme, build it limited, build it to win. Let the racing success sell the regular cars. It's a formula Ford has used for the Cobra, the GT40, the Boss Mustangs, and modern cars like the GT500 and GT. The Thunderbolt started that tradition. The story of the Thunderbolt is ultimately about corporate commitment to performance. Ford could have built a mildly modified Fairlane with a big engine and called it good enough. Instead, they built something genuinely extreme, something that terrified competitors and redefined what a factory drag car could be. 100 cars, one season of complete dominance, and a legacy that made every Ford performance vehicle that came after it possible. That's the Thunderbolt, the supercharged factory drag racer that GM was too scared to compete against, and the car that proved Ford could beat anyone when they decided to go racing. Ford took a boring Fairlane sedan, ripped out everything unnecessary, bolted a screaming supercharger to a 427, and created a legend. Sometimes the best way to win is to build something so extreme that everyone else has to completely rethink their program. The Thunderbolt was that extreme, and that's exactly why it became legendary.